Yeah, I'm starting. Yeah, I'm going. We're gonna start. A question? A story about kosher. Let's hear a story about kosher. Yeah. Kosher. Yeah. Yeah. So it's true that people, the American think that kosher is automatically healthier and more natural, etc. So kosher is a selling point, and that's why companies write kosher. You'll see the word like every inch of space on the packaging is valuable. There's a lot of thoughts and it's not random. Some kid just like slapped it all together. There's a lot of science and thinking that goes into what they put onto their packaging. And in fact, these many like kosher and it's prominent space in some foods anyway, is because of the value of the kosher in making something sell more and get more. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Good evening, Faith. I'm glad that you're watching us. What? Correct. And not every food do they really care about the kosher. I mean, some people they care more about the some like if you go buy candy, you find the OU in a little corner, but like more healthy things. Okay. Anyway, let's begin, my friends. Chapter 7 is going to be talking about mix-ups and mishaps. So basically, chapter 6 is very, very important because that was the fundamental principles upon which we're going to be basing what we're learning tonight about basar, b'chalav, any mixture of flavors, whether it's meat and milk or non-kosher and kosher, etc. It's going to be the same fundamental ideas, which is that, as we already learned, there's something called tam ki ikar. The flavor of something is considered like it itself. So obviously you can't eat meat and milk together. But let's say meat fell into a milk plate or milk food. You took the meat out. Now there's no more meat and milk together. You still can't eat it if there was a transfer of flavor from the meat into the dairy or vice versa. And as we already explained last week, the primary method, how this happens, how the taste is transferred from one to the other is through heat. Heat, there you go. Very good. There's other ways too. You need a liquid, which is the medium, and then you need the heat to make the transfer happen. What we are going to primarily talk about today is the concept of bittul. Remember that word? It's on page 127 in your books. Bittul. Bittul means to nullify something. The nullification of a flavor amongst other flavors. So if there's too little of the meat flavor in the milk pot or vice versa, or whatever the flavors are being mixed, and the other, so obviously assuming you took out the actual piece of meat from the milk, the flavor is considered negligible. It's nullified into the greater food, and therefore you can still eat the food. Got that? So let's review and make sure we're all on the same page and get into this concept of when things go wrong and how much you can apply, etc. So number one, as we already discussed last week, we need to make sure we have all our principles clear. If dry salami touches dry cheese, no fat, no oil, no nothing, what's the halacha? What do you need to do? Wipe it off. That's it. You don't even have to do that. Like nothing. You can eat it. You don't even have to wash it. Okay, the door is locked. Thank you. I make Randy run. So as long as they're both cold and dry and not fatty, you don't need to do anything. However, if there's already moisture, if they're damp, what do you need to do? Wait a second. Hello, Hadassah. So if either is damp or it's moist, then you need to wash it off. So then you need to wash it off with cold or lukewarm water. And what happens if they're fatty? So the fat that we already said, fat goes even deeper. Once something is fatty, it goes in. So then you need to clean the entire shell, the klipa. So you got to scrub it. Scrub it means not just to wash it, to rinse it up, but to like scrub off the top layer, a thin shell or a thin layer, a peel of it. Now, where does it get more complicated? It gets more complicated if one of the items is liquid, such as cold milk spilled onto cold meat, or cold meat fell into cold milk. So here we have the liquid, but there's no heat. So is there a transfer of taste? If cold milk spills onto cold meat, it falls off, right? Well, let's say a piece of meat falls into a pot of cold milk, a cup of cold milk. You have a bowl of cereal and milk. He's leaving. That was Joseph was leaving. So let's say you have cold milk. We have a bowl of cold milk and a piece of meat fell in, cold meat. And now you took the meat out. Has there been a transfer of taste between the cold milk and the cold meat? No. However, what might be there? The actual milk itself. So meaning, did the milk get absorbed into the meat? If milk got absorbed, even though it didn't get a transfer of taste, if you're going to go cook this piece of meat now, and there's a little bit of milk somehow inside the meat, or absorbed into the meat, now you're cooking meat and milk together, which is obviously going to be treif, will make your pot treif, etc. So it'll be complicated. You'd have to figure out what kind of meat was it. Was it raw or cooked? Because raw meat absorbs liquid much more than cooked meat does. Whether the meat had crevices and cracks that would allow the meat to absorb more milk, whether the meat was spiced, which would make it more absorbing, etc., make it more open if there was spice on the meat or none. So if it's a frozen piece of meat or didn't absorb, be different. Just wash off the milk and that's it. But if it's raw, if it's a spiced piece of meat, that's like you're spicing it. Not supposed to word when you're marinating it. It's gonna be very, very different. It's absorbing. It's in the process of absorbing. So now the likelihood of the milk being absorbed into the meat is much greater, right? Much greater. But the point is that even when there's no heat, there could still be an issue where the milk gets absorbed into the meat or vice versa. So even though milk cold generally doesn't have a transfer of taste, there could still be a transfer of actual food. That's as far as the cold. That's the easy part. Now let's get to the hard part. The hard part is when there is heat. Because when there's heat, not only are we worried about the actual milk being absorbed into the veins or whatever the meat, we're more worried about the transfer of flavor. And once you have a transfer of flavor, as we already established last week, tam ki ikr, the taste becomes like a primary thing. So now there's the meat flavor absorbed in the meat. The whole piece of meat is now basar b'chalav. Meat and milk. Got it? So let's look at some examples. If a hot, I'm on page 131. If a hot fleshig pot touches a hot dairy pot, but their point of contact is dry. So you have two pots, touch each other on the outside. Is there a transfer of flavor? No. Why not? Because it's dry. So even though both pots are hot, the heat alone is not enough to transfer flavor without a medium of liquid. And therefore the pots are kosher and the contents remain permitted. However, if there's even a minimal amount of moisture at the point of contact, now we're already worried about a transfer of flavor. So there may be room to be lenient, there's a lot of food involved, etc. If you say it was only a little bit, how much moisture is needed to go from the meat pot through the moisture to the dairy pot? But if there's a significant amount of liquid, if the pots are steaming and there's wet, stuff spilled over the pot, and it's hot, guess what? So now the contents of the pot are prohibited, and everything inside the pot is prohibited. Everything inside. Why? Because the moment the pot becomes treif, now the whole pot is giving out flavor into the food inside it. So now the food inside the pot is cooking not in the meat pot, now it's cooking in a treif mixture of meat and milk pot. Understand? So now the whole pot and everything inside it would be non-kosher, and the pots would need to be kosher. Okay. Now, what happens if you put a hot fleishik pot on the milchik countertop? So you have a dairy countertop, okay? That's all right? Well, it will depend. Answer will always be depends. If the countertop is clean and dry, and the pot is dry, even though the pot is hot, as Randy said correctly, just a hot pot on a dairy counter, that can be a tongue twister. Even a hot pot that's dry on a dairy countertop is not going to transfer flavor because there's no medium of a liquid to transfer it. However, what if the countertop is wet? Water spilled on the countertop. That happens. I've seen wet kitchen countertops, right? There's water on the countertop. Now the area of the counter where you put the hot dairy pot on this meat countertop has to be koshered. Okay, that's regarding the countertop. What about the pot? So we look upwards. The pot was hot. You want to pass me 2 cups? I'll make it easier. Just 2 empty cups. Thank you. And this will be the counter. On the video, they can't see. Here's going to be the countertop. So thank you. Perfect. So we should label this meat and dairy. They touch. It's dry. No transfer of flavor. If it's wet, the wetness can transfer flavor into this pot, and from this pot into all the food inside it. Now, what happens if we put this down on the countertop? Okay. So here's your countertop, and here's the pot. Now, when it's dry, no flavor gets absorbed. No problem. If there's liquid, so this is meat, this is dairy, okay? The liquid, the water over here, is going to cause a transfer into the pot, which is hot, of the dairy flavor of the counter. And now the countertop dairy flavor is being absorbed into the pot. The pot is treif, and the food is treif. Sorry, the other way around. The going down, if it's hot, the heat is putting the heat is coming out. It's going to go into the dairy countertop and make the countertop treif. Will the heat go up? The flavor is cold. The countertop is cold. Will the heat of the pot be hot enough to make the flavor in the countertop come out of the countertop and go into the pot? I said it backwards. You understand what I just said? I said it. So this is cold. There's dairy flavor in this counter. So the pot is hot. It absorbs the flavor because it's hot. That's can it pull? Sorry. The pot. So for sure, it's releasing its flavor. It's coming out into the countertop. We'll release it up. Someone will say yes if it's hot and is liquid. And as we got to check and see how hot did the countertop get. If the countertop gets so, if you put it down for a second, and you goes right away, before there was time for that pot to heat up the countertop, so they didn't get the flavor out of the countertop into the pot. But if it was there for a while, and now the counter is hot, that means that the flavor in the countertop was expunged, and now that got transferred to now the pot, and the contents are treif. You following? I know I said that not so clearly. Hope that's clear, or I could say it again. That's what we have to see. Is there enough heat to make the flavor in the countertop hot enough? Now, continuing 132. What about if the meat is cooked in a clean, non-ben yomo dairy pot? What's ben yomo? Who remembers the ben yomo? What's ben yomo? Son of something. Yom is a day. Son of a day. Meaning that it has been used within 24 hours. Okay. So if this pot was used within 24 hours, ben yomo, it was used within 24 hours, what does that mean? The flavor inside is fresh flavor. And therefore, the flavor that comes out of it is good flavor. And it will make the countertop or the other pot of the other food not kosher. However, if it's not ben yomo, meaning if this was only used 2 days ago, been used in the last 24 hours, the flavor inside it is stale. It's not a good flavor. So I used this to cook meat in 2 days ago. Now I'm cooking milk inside it. 2 days later, what's happening? You can't knowingly do it. Obviously, you can't do it on purpose. You're right. But now you did it. You did it. You put milk into a meat pot and you cook the milk in there. And now your milk is bubbling, boiling hot. What's the halacha? What's fine? Be specific. There isn't fresh flavor in the pot to make the milk non-kosher. So the contents of the pot will remain kosher even though they're dairy cooked in a meat pot. Yes, very good. Why do you have to rekasha the pot though? Because the pot absorbed flavor of meat and flavor of dairy. So at least that's the Ashkenazi ruling. Even a week later, this pot has absorbed two different flavors. It makes it a treif pot. But the meat, the dairy that you cooked, we don't say that the dairy is treif. Because the dairy is receiving a stale meat flavor from 2 days ago, doesn't ruin it. But the pot, right now, if you were to go cook in it an hour later, what would happen? Stale meat flavor come out, but dairy flavor come out. So you have one pot with two different flavors. And therefore, the Ashkenazi ruling is you need to kasher the pot. It's hard to maybe not, but that's the Ashkenazi ruling. Got that? So there's a very interesting note over here. And some of the people in the class that would be here are not here tonight. They'll be having a heart attack right now. They would tell them that yes, if you cooked by mistake, you can't do it on purpose, but if you cooked by mistake meat in a dairy pot, if the pot had not been used in 24 hours, and it's clean, obviously, because if it's dirty or even greasy, that's not what we're talking about. If it's clean, a clean pot that hasn't been used in 24 hours, you can still eat the food that was cooked inside that pot. Or if you put your spoon, a meat spoon, into a cup of coffee, hot coffee with milk, if that spoon hadn't been used in 24 hours, the coffee is still kosher. The spoon has to be kosher, but the coffee is good. On the other hand, if the dairy pot had been used within the past 24 hours for dairy, so it's not stale flavor coming out of the pot, it's fresh flavor. The meat inside becomes basar b'chalav, meat, a mixture of meat and dairy, and it's forbidden. Not only is it forbidden to eat, are you allowed to get benefit or pleasure from a mixture of meat and dairy? No, as we already learned. So you can't even give it to a non-Jew. You can't feed it to your dog. You can't get any benefits from it. Can't even give it to, not Yofi. Yofi's not alive anymore. To, whatever I don't know, your no dogs, huh? Matuka. You can't give Matuka the mixture of meat and dairy that got cooked together, or the meat that cooked in the dairy pot that been used within this basar b'chalav, and you can't get benefit or pleasure in feeding your with pleasure. I'm saying you don't have to buy another food. And of course, needless to say, the pot has to be kosher. Okay, you can see what we just said on the little chart on page 133. I hope that that's clear, and that's very important. Yes? So basically, I think I wasn't following the chat. I didn't see. So basically, it's easier to throw. What away? I don't remember. Okay. By the way, throwing things away is not always a good thing because throwing good food away is baltashcha. So yes, by Jewish law, if food is edible and you throw it away, it's not always a good thing. Okay. So far, we're clear? Yes? Hadassah, Faith? Yeah? Randy? Okay. So now we're going to get a little more complicated. Yeah, no. Meat and milk you have to throw out. You can't do anything. You can't get benefit. I'm talking about food is kosher. Let's say you cooked meat in a dairy pot. Wasn't used in more than a day, so it's kosher. But you still feel guilty, like I don't know, if it's still a dairy pot. Maybe I shouldn't use it. So you want to be like extra religious and just throw it away, just to be extra careful. Not always is that the right thing because throwing away good food is a sin. So just throwing away food, if it's not kosher, that is not kosher. Of course, you throw it away. But if it's kosher, in fact, the practical lesson, the end, the spiritual message is sometimes God makes that the sparks of something kosher, of something not kosher, and normally can't be eaten, get mixed into a much, much larger ratio of kosher food where it's nullified, the bittul, we're going to talk about right now, in order to allow for the elevation of the sparks that are there. So you got to know the law to know what's considered a real mixture of meat and milk and what's not. Okay. Now comes one of the famous laws of kosher, which is bitul b'shishim. What does bitul b'shishim mean? You speak a little Hebrew now? Bitul. What does bitul mean? We just learned bitul 10 minutes ago. Bitul means nullified, nullification. Shishim in Hebrew means 60. 1 in 60. 1 in 60. You heard of that, right? 1 in 60. So let's talk about it. Let me surprise you a little more. So in halacha, there's a concept that a regular food, min b'she'enei minai, which means something of a different kind. So we're not talking about meat and meat. Let's say you have milk and meat, and now they got mixed together. The ruling is that if there's more than 60 times of meat to the milk, or the kosher to the not kosher, whatever it is, it's going to be nullified, and you'll be allowed to eat it. The exception is something spicy, like a davar charif, is not meant to be nullified 1 in 60. So if you had a spice that was used for idolatry, there'd be exceptions to the rule. This is the general rule, okay? Something which is meant like a rennet, something which is meant to give flavor, it's not nullified per se. But generally speaking, it's nullified 1 in 60. Now, just to explain the law, by the way, really this is referring to things that are not the same. Things that are the same, actually, I'm going to say something else first. So let's say meat fell into milk, okay? You took out the hot, not cold. Hot meat fell into hot milk. You took out the meat. Because obviously, as long as the meat is there, it's not nullified. You can see it. The entire conversation we're going to have now for the next whatever number of minutes, 20 minutes, is only going to be where you don't see it anymore. If you can see it, it can never, ever be nullified. You can't nullify something you see. So we're talking about, let's say a little bit of milk fell into the chicken soup. You don't see it. It's not, and you can't take it out. It's liquid mixed in. It's not take-outable. Or it is something you took it out, but the flavor already went in. So I don't know how much flavor went in compared to how much milk was there. So you took out the actual thing in a way that you don't see it anymore. Or it's liquid that got nullified, you can't see it. If it'll be min b'minai, let's say meat, kosher meat with non-kosher meat, but the same, kosher beef with non-kosher beef, there biblically be nullified a majority, but the rabbi said not to differentiate, so they also said bitul b'shishim. So today we rule the same measurement for both, so let's keep it simple. 1 in 60. How much is 1 in 60? So let me read this paragraph and then let me give you some practical applications, okay? So to illustrate the concept, consider an example of a piece of steak falls into a large vat of boiling milk. If the volume of milk is 60 times greater than the volume of the steak, the milk remains permitted as the taste of the steak has been nullified. However, the steak itself must be discarded. Yeah, this is the rule that we just said. When the item can still be identified in the mixture, bittul does not apply to render it permissible. It must be removed. Got it. Okay. You see that image. So now, how much, let me read one more, how much is bittul b'shishim? Practical. In simple English. How much is bittul b'shishim? You have how much is 1 in 60? So I was curious. I wanted to Google. I understand exactly. A pot of soup, right? I told my kids, wife, we had a whole discussion by our dinner table. They were shocked. 60 to 1. 60 to 1 means a 60 to 1 ratio. So let's say a splash of milk, a teaspoon of milk. A teaspoon of milk is how much milk? How much is a teaspoon? 5 milliliters. It's okay. I don't know this all by heart, but I just Googled this like a half hour ago. 5 milliliters. He's going to check it. So what's 60 times 5 milliliters? 300 milliliters. How much is a cup? 236 milliliters, which means that a splash of milk, a teaspoon of milk, is nullified in 1 1/4 cup of meat. We always think, a big pot of meat and a little bit of soup, milk fell in. If it's a cup and a half of chicken soup and 1 teaspoon fell in, it's nullified. As a teaspoon's a small amount. But I'll give you an idea. It's just enough that you can't taste the milk in there anymore. So 1 teaspoon and more than a cup and a half of milk, of meat, you won't taste it. What about pasta? Let's say a thing of butter, dairy butter, like a little slice, which is 10 grams, a little forgot what it's called. 10 grams of butter touched your meat pasta. How much is 60 times 10 grams? 600 grams. How much is a pound of spaghetti? Pound of spaghetti is a little under, it's like 500 something grams. So a little over a pound of spaghetti, let's say a pound and a half. 2 pounds, if you have 2 pounds, a box of spaghetti is a pound. So if you have 2 boxes of spaghetti, which is what my wife will cook, 2 boxes of spaghetti, and the piece of butter touches it, it's not a huge pot. That's already batal b'shishim. Again, you have to know the ratios. You have to figure it out and actually do the math. So you have to figure out how much, or approximate, obviously you can approximate up. Have to be there a certain amount of time. I'm not following the questions, Faith, when you're, what would have to be there a certain amount of time? So the moment that with heat transfers immediate. So if you have a little bit of butter and 2 pounds of spaghetti, that's fine. Because obviously the butter is absorbed. It's not there anymore. And you can't take it out. You don't see it. Its flavor is negligible compared to the 2 pounds of butter. That's what the rabbis rule. And this is a tradition, if I'm not mistaken, starting from the times of Moshe. It may be from the times of Moshe, I'm not sure. By the way, I want to say something interesting, though. The 1/60th, yeah, what about it? Have to be a certain amount of time? No. The moment that there's 2 foods touch each other with heat, there's an immediate transfer of flavor. After 1 second, there's a transfer of flavor. Okay. By the way, let's say the teaspoon of milk fell into a half a cup of chicken soup. Fell into the bowl of chicken soup, okay? Which is less than a cup. And now you put that bowl of chicken soup back into the pot. I don't know why he did that, but he put the bowl of chicken soup back into the pot. And the pot is 4 cups. Do you say that the 1 teaspoon of milk is nullified in the 4 cups of soup? You guys following the question? This is a cup, okay? This cup has 12 ounces. I don't know how many milliliters that is. But it's, let's do the math really quickly. Where's I had a calculator on my phone before. Here we go. So let's just do 12 ounces. It's 354 milliliters, whatever. So 354 milliliters. So what will be batal b'shishim? 5. 1 teaspoon will be nullified here. If you put 1 teaspoon of milk into this cup, let's say you had 1 teaspoon of chicken soup into this cup of coffee. Still kosher. But now let's say you put in a tablespoon, not a teaspoon, a tablespoon. So the tablespoon is not going to be nullified in this cup, and it's going to be treif. And now you pour this cup into a second cup. So now you have 2 cups. But there's only 1 tablespoon of chicken soup with 2 cups of milk. Exactly right. This is no longer a tablespoon of milk. This is now a full cup of meat and milk mixed together. And so now to nullify in this, you would need 60 times this whole cup. So you would need 60 times 12 ounces. So you need like 72 ounces, 12, yes, 60, 70, 72 ounces. To nullify. You understand? You following the logic? Got it. Okay, good. However, there's a very, very important caveat over here. Very important. When do we say that if you put 1 teaspoon of chicken soup into this cup of coffee, it would still be kosher? Teaspoon 5 milliliters. This is 200, whatever, 350 milliliters in here. When do we say that it's kosher? Is only when it happened by mistake. In halacha, that's called bidi eved, which means after the fact. But if someone comes and says, oh, you have 354 milliliters in this cup, let me add in 5 milliliters of chicken soup because it's still nullified, it's still less than 1 by 60, it's treif. Still treif. This allowing of bittul is only bidi evet, which means after the fact. Lechatchila, which means before the fact, it's never ever going to be allowed. And the rabbis gave a rule to this. If you look on page 137, you'll see the rule. Ein mevatlin iser lechatchila. You can never nullify a prohibition on purpose, which means, let's say you had a teaspoon of chicken soup in this cup, but it was only half full. So you know what? Let me fill the cup up with milk. And then it will be nullified, the taste, because it'll be more than 60 times a teaspoon in this cup. That doesn't work. Doesn't work. Because you're not allowed to do it lechatchila. You're not allowed to plan or knowingly try to nullify it. You can add 1,000 cups of milk to that teaspoon of chicken soup. It's not going to nullify it because the nullification only works b'di'evet, where it happened by mistake. Correct. You understand? Meaning the rabbis are worried. We're going to start spreading it. You're going to start people start cooking like that on purpose. Oh, I can put in less than I have 5. I can put in a teaspoon. I have 354 milliliters in here. As long as I stay under the 1:60 ratio, I'll be fine. So you should know you're never ever allowed to be mevatel an iser lechatchila to do it properly. Okay, got it. So 354 milliliters. Okay. So now imagine this. It's 5:00 p.m. and you are preparing an exquisite creamy potato soup on the stove. It's been simmering for 2 hours and you're almost ready to serve it. Your phone rings, so you leave the kitchen for a few minutes to take the call. And when you return, you discover that one of your children has tasted the soup. Upon further inspection, you find out that they used a fleishik spoon to take soup from the pot, not realizing it contained milk. It's a creamy soup. They didn't know. They're not so smart. In fact, the same spoon you used yesterday at 7 p.m. to serve beef chili. Okay. So the first issue, what do you say? Is the spoon kosher? Is the food kosher? What's the deal? You use a spoon used yesterday at 7 p.m. for meat to taste soup that's cooking on the stove today at 5 p.m. What do you rule, young ladies? Spoon's got to get kosher. Okay, what about the food in the soup? Okay. So there's a few conditions over here. You looked, you read ahead. It's not so simple. In this case, it's not going to be good. The food's not going to be good. Why? Because what happened in this case? The spoon is ben yomo or not ben yomo? The spoon was used from 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. Is that more or less than 24 hours? Less than 24 hours. So the spoon is ben yomo. It's only been 22 hours since it didn't have meat flavor put into it. So the meat flavor of the chili is still fresh. Next, we examined the degree of the soup in the milchik pot. The soup we said was cooking for 2 hours on the stove, which means that it's yad soledesmo. It's hot to touch. It's over 113, 112 degrees Fahrenheit. And we also talked about the difference between a kli rishon and a kli sheni. Right? So if you had poured the soup out of the original pot into another bowl, then there could be more room to be lenient. But here it's still in the original pot that was cooking on the fire. So in this case, because you put a meat spoon into the dairy pot, and the meat spoon had been used within 24 hours, and the soup was hot, was over 112 degrees Fahrenheit, assuming, then the halacha would be the spoon is treif, the soup is treif, and the pot is treif. Everything is treif. Unless the spoon is less 1/60th of the soup in the pot. I'll figure out the volume of the spoon. You got to figure out how much of the spoon was inserted into the pot. So by the way, we don't think how much chili is in the spoon. The whole spoon becomes a meat spoon, so the whole spoon is giving out meat flavor. But how much of the spoon actually went in? So did you put in just the top? Was it a big spoon? Is it a small spoon? Was it a ladle? Or was it a little, teaspoon? Or was it a soup spoon? It's a different size spoon. So you got to figure that out. Figure out the volume of that spoon. What's the volume of a spoon? I started doing this actually. I got distracted. I was in the middle of actually figuring this out. Let me see. I was Googling the size of a spoon. So here we go. A spoon. A cup is where? So a spoon is, it's hard to say what size spoon, whatever. So it wasn't so clear. But you have to figure out how big the spoon is in volume to the amount of soup in the pot. Because also it can be more soup, less soup in the pot. So if there's more than 60 times soup in the pot, I'm going to Google after to figure out exactly how much, let's say, the volume of a teaspoon will be. I don't want to waste time now doing it. I was in the middle of doing that, like trying to figure out, because it wasn't so easy to figure out. If there's more than 60 times the volume of the soup than the spoon, then it's all kosher. Except for the spoon itself. Because the spoon itself absorbs both meat and dairy. But the pot and the food in the pot, the meat that came out of the spoon was batal b'shishim.
Does it make a difference? What is it? It's a glass spoon.
I've never seen a glass spoon before. That'd be very dangerous to use. A glass spoon? What? Yeah, I don't know if I would use a glass spoon, but that doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make a difference. What?
Plastic doesn't make a difference.
No, plastic.
Doesn't make a difference if it's porous or not.
If it absorbs flavor, it absorbs flavor. Absorb flavor, it absorbs flavor.
And you can't throw the food out.
What?
And you can't throw the food out.
No, you can throw the food out. I'm saying if it's treif, then you can eat it. Yeah, theoretically, if it's just, not only that, if it's basar b'chalav, you can't give it to a non-Jew. You can't do anything with it. You throw it out. Then you throw it out. Okay. Now let's get really complicated. Okay, you guys are still with me? Hadassah, you okay? It's hard. So let's try and keep this a little bit more light, a little bit. Here's a chart on page 142. You guys are getting the point is you need to understand the equations that go into asking a question, right? And trying to figure out the ratios, ben yomo, not ben yomo, was there heat? Etc. Now, what about the lid over a pot? The lid is complicated. It's a lid. Let's say you put a dairy lid on a meat pot. Well, let's use the example we had in this. You're cooking a creamy pot, a creamy soup with milk in the soup, and you put a meat cover on top of your dairy soup. Is it kosher, not kosher? Is the soup kosher? Is the pot kosher? Is the lid kosher? 3 different questions here. You're asking the rabbi. Asking about the lid, you're asking about the pot, you're asking about the food. Yes, what do you say? The steam is going up into the lid. So Adam is right. There's just one thing. So let me repeat what Adam said for the recording. The steam is going up. It's being absorbed into the lid. So now the lid is becoming treif because the lid is absorbing the milk flavor and it already has meat flavor. So that's becoming treif. Now it's pouring back down because the lid is dripping, stripping treif lid flavor into the food. Treif. The only thing that you didn't mention, though, you missed the very important point. The lid has to be a ben yomo lid. If the lid had been sitting in your pantry for the last 2 days, and now you took it out, even though it's a meat lid sitting on top of a creamy soup, and the lid itself has absorbed both meat and dairy, so the lid has to be koshered, but the soup is kosher. And the pot is kosher. Because the pot's not becoming treif. You understand? You following? You getting the of course, what if the food wasn't boiling? What if there was no steam? Well, there might be a transfer of, there might be liquid, but again, if it's not hot enough, It wouldn't do anything. It has to be hot. Correct. You got the idea. Okay. Now, what about pouring from, we learned about Eroi also. We learned about the laws of pouring, right? So what happens if you pour hot liquid from a dairy pot into a meat cup? Well, again, it's going to depend. Depends. You're learning if it's a ben yomo, not ben yomo. If it's ben yomo, right? So now the milk, the water, what you're pouring out from the dairy pot has to be kosher. By the way, we're talking about water. Let me explain. Hold on. Wasn't nothing about pouring meat into a dairy cup. I'm talking about pouring water from a meat pot into a dairy cup. You understand? Meat, dairy. What am I cooking? Water. Boiling water. Boiling hot water. The water is hot to touch. Now, when I cook water in this meat pot, what flavor does the water have? Meat. That's if it's a ben yomo pot. So if it's a ben yomo pot, which means that the water inside, even though it's just water, absorb meat flavor. If I pour that water into a clean dairy cup, what's happened now? Meat flavor has gone to the dairy cup, and the dairy cup is not kosher. Has to be kosher. Just from water, not from any actual meat and milk ever touching each other. Which is why your sink can be such a problem, or a dishwasher, because if you have boiling hot water coming from here into here, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be transferring the flavor. Now, if, let's say it's not ben yomo, then it'll be okay, right? What if it's dirty? It's dirty for sure. It's not good. What if this is a non-ben yomo pot, but this cup sitting in the sink, this dairy cup, has cold coffee still left in the bottom of the cup? So you have your sink, okay? I put into my sink my coffee mug. This cup I drink coffee from in the morning, and it has a little bit of residue in the cup still. It's not washed yet. And now I take this pot, this meat pot, I boiled water in it, and I pour from the meat pot into the sink, which includes also the cup that's in the sink. Even correct, the pot, but the cup, even though it's not ben yomo, the cup has milk inside it, so it's going to get both flavors. You understand? And the cup has to be kasher. Yeah, a very good question. Very good question. What about your sink? So if you poured hot meat flavor water into a dairy cup, and now there's a little bit of milk residue in there, what flavor is going into your sink? And dairy. Your sink is 100% treif. Now, again, we don't eat off of our sink, but you can't put dishes with hot water onto the metal of the sink. If the sink is cold, you could. We're going to get to the laws of a kosher sink in its own chapter because you're going to see, you're starting to get the idea of why a sink could be a very big problem. Okay. Now, what about hot water? We just talked about hot water if they're ben yomo, if they're dirty in the sink. Let's say you have in the sink, you have dirty in dish. Let's say you have a coffee cup, and a bowl of meat soup, whatever. They're both using the last 24 hours, and you mix hot water in. Of course, even though the water is parv, the hot water will mix together the ben yomo of this, the ben yomo of that. The hot water was clean hot water, but it mixes them together. And now they're both not good. Okay. Now, there's also an issue of the steam coming up. So what happens if this is a dairy cup? But it's not just a dairy cup. It has coffee and milk inside it. And now I'm pouring hot water. I want more hot water. And this hot water is not ben yomo. I take a meat pot and I pour, let's even parv. I pour the parv, let's forget the meat for a second because it's treif. I pour the water boiling hot into here. And now the steam is coming up from the milk, and the steam is impacting this pot. You got that? The remaining water now absorbs milk. You can't pour that into meat. That's why you got to be very careful. The samovar or an urn to always put the water in first, not to put. If someone, let's say, has, even let's say this urn over here. Let's say someone made a cup of coffee with milk. Could have happened. They made a cup of coffee with milk and said, I want some more. It's too much milk. It's cold now. I want more hot water. So they put their cup 3/4 full under the urn right behind Adam and put more boiling hot water, and it'll burn you. And now the steam of milk going up, that urn is assumed to have a dairy status that I would not put chicken soup under there. You understand? Meaning, so it's part of it hasn't actually become a dairy urn, but it could be. I mean, it theoretically, no, because the front, the spigot that comes out. So after 24 hours, it'll be it'll be okay anyway. But okay. Now we talked about countertops, so maybe let's talk about the countertops again. When milk spills onto a countertop and flows under the meat pot. So what happens if milk spilled on your counter and the milk spread onto where the meat pot is? So it depends if it's hot. Very good. Is the counter hot? Is the meat pot hot? What was the question, Faith? The steam would transfer flavor? Yes. Steam transfers flavor? Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. Which is why another problem with the oven, with the kitchen, is underneath the stovetops. Because your kitchen, if you go under your stovetop, in your kitchen, there's like a little grease trap there to get rid of the steam. That could be a big problem because what happens when you're cooking there, steam goes up and then it drips back down. It's a big problem. So if you have, let's say hypothetically, a meat pot on one side of your oven and a dairy pot on the other and it drips down, you're going to have a big problem. Big problem. Now, what if milk splattered on the outside of the pot? So let's say you're cooking in this meat pot, right? And then the milk splatters on the outside. See, did the milk splatter where the food was or above where the food is? Is the milk that splattered batel b'shishim compared to the amount of meat inside the pot? Or not batel b'shishim, not nullified, etc., etc. And by the way, just something here regarding the urn, I would assume that this urn here has probably had milk splatter on it before. That would be my guess. I've never actually seen someone splattering milk on it, but my assumption is it's always used near milk, right? And it's hot, and this hot stuff spills in water. And so you can assume that there's a dairy status there. Anyway, let's do the review. So turn to page 146. Let's see whose brain is working. I don't want to give you more examples. I don't want to totally blow everyone's brains away over here. So what is the correct course of action if one accidentally cooked meat in a clean... One second. Okay, so what's the correct course of action if you accidentally cooked meat in a clean dairy pot? Do we say no action is required since there is no dairy residue in the pot, there's no concern? Do we say the meat is certainly forbidden and the status of the pot depends on whether it's ben yom or not? Do we say throw out the meat and kosher the dairy pot? Or do we say the dairy pot requires koshering and the status of the meat depends on whether the pot was ben yom or not? What do you guys say? Mm-hmm. In the case where you accidentally cook the meat in a clean dairy pot, the dairy pot has to be koshered, and the meat would all depend on whether or not the pot itself was ben yomo or not, as we learned. Correct. Question 2, which of the following statements is true? Let's read all the things. Do we say that if a non-kosher substance accidentally falls into a kosher mixture and there is not yet bittul b'shishim, one may add more kosher food until it's nullified 1 in 60? Do we say that you're allowed to add a few drops of meat to dairy soup? So as long as you're sure that it's going to be batel b'shishim, it's going to be less than 1/60th? Is it true that one may create conditions of bittul even lechatchila, but the Jewish custom is not to? Or is one prohibited from creating a condition of bittul lechatchila? The answer is D. You are never allowed. It's not just a custom, it's a prohibition. You are not allowed to ever knowingly create a situation where the one food be nullified in another food. What is halacha if meat falls into a pot of boiling milk that is 60 times its volume? Both the meat and milk are forbidden. Meat's permitted, sorry, but the milk is forbidden. The meat permits to be discarded, but the milk remains kosher. Both the meat and the milk remain kosher. See, the meat that's there has to be thrown out. It can't be nullified if you can see it. Only the flavor that's not visible is able to become nullified if there's less than 1/60th. And finally, if you put a hot fleishik spoon into a hot milchik soup, either make a difference. The soup is hot anyway. Which of the following factors is relevant for determining the halacha? Whether it's ben yomo, how hot the soup is, whether the pot is a kli rishon or a kli sheni, or all of the above. All of the above. Okay. So we learned a few very important things today. We learned about bittul, nullifying foods. We learned about bittul b'shishim. We learned about the difference between b'diavad and lechatchila. You're not allowed to do that. And next week we'll start talking about if something became non-kosher, how we go about the process of koshering that object. Okay, my friends? Actually, I take it back. I will not be here next week. There's no Hebrew school next Wednesday either. Actually, I will not be here next Wednesday. So not next Wednesday. In 2 Wednesdays from now. Okay? Thank you very much. Laila Tov. Thank you, Faith.